out of the Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right, welcome everyone to this week's edition of Breaking History, where we have a lot to go through. We have discussed in previous weeks, Gordon and I, the need to finally flesh out a little bit more in greater detail the Muslim Brotherhood, since it is a very important factor in world politics. It's something that is very little understood, as for many Americans, just thinking about the nuances and understanding what is the dynamics shaping the Muslim world and geopolitics in general on that front is very difficult to wrap the mind around. So we're going to go through some of that and clarify some of these ambiguities. There's some breaking events that we're gonna talk about, especially something that that a certain figure has just said in Saudi Arabia that is very important to keep in mind. Gordon, before I run the opening ad, how are you doing, man?
Dude, I'm great. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm like completely flustered right now because of what we're about to talk about, the developments that are happening. And we'll get to that in a minute, but it's kind of just throwing me through a loop. So I'm going to need a minute to organize and get re-geared. So yeah, right. I'm great though, dude. This is a huge white pill that we're about to share. And so I hope everyone's having a good day.
All right. Sounds good. So let's, with that, without further ado, let's listen to an ad from today's sponsor and we'll jump on from there. So MyPillow.
A large retail store just canceled a huge order, leaving us with a ton of extra MyPillows. But you know what? That's their loss. I'm going to make it your gain. For the first time ever, you get standard classic MyPillows for wholesale prices, only $14.88. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Only $14.88. But it gets even better. For a limited time, I'm going to offer my entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Upgrade to a queen size MyPillow for just $18.88. King size only $1 more. Get my body pillows for $29.88 and multi-use MyPillows for only $9.88. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on the screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever on TV, including my standard size MyPillow, only $14.88. They've never been offered this low before. We have limited quantities at this price, so limit's going to be 10, and once they're gone, they're gone.
All right. So now, I know just a few minutes ago, you brought to my attention something very interesting that Mohammed bin Sultan has just announced. Is that something that you think that we should just jump right into?
Yeah, I think we just jump right into it. I think that we are going to discuss Muslim Brotherhood because I think all this ties together. This is going to but this is the thing that I've been waiting for basically since even before October 7th, and this kind of addresses my core thesis when it comes to the Middle East in general. So I was driving home on my way here from my office to do the show, and I was listening to Judge Napolitano, who's live right now with Colonel McGregor. And McGregor started out with they're doing like a 1-year sit rep after October 7th on Israel. And he starts off with like a diatribe and he says very early on, and I literally hit pause as I'm driving and I'm trying to like look up, like fact check him. And I have fact checked him. He's 100% right. He said the Saudi crown prince, it's almost like McGregor knew this was happening because he's like, the Saudi crown prince just announced he basically wants like a criminal prosecution, maybe like a war crimes tribunal of Netanyahu and the Israeli leadership, which is exactly what I expected to happen from him. And anyone who's listened to the show probably has heard me say that. But let's just play I want to play that whole clip because he kind of talks about the context of Israel right now. And so I'm going to share that. We'll play it and then we'll kind of have a discussion and then get into Muslim Brotherhood.
Sounds good.
Maybe share my screen. And I'm going to try to play at a faster speed. I'll find a good speed where you can still understand him while he's speaking. But we can get through it quickly.
Hamas and the response by Israel on Gaza. How has the landscape of the Middle East changed in the past year, Colonel?
I think the best way to sum it up is to suggest that Israel is now approaching what I would call the Little Bighorn moment. And by Little Bighorn, I mean that Custer rode out to find Indians because his view was that if we didn't find them and pin them down, that they would escape. and he never thought that he was going to find very many. He wrote out, he found that virtually every Indian within hundreds of miles was present, and they made short work of him. I think that Israel is on the road to the Little Bighorn, only it's in the Middle East. Virtually everyone in the region has turned against Israel. I mean, we were looking at headlines for several weeks. Oh, the quote unquote good Arabs are supporting Israel. What they really meant is that our billions of dollars were bribing them to stay out. It looks like the bribes no longer work, and there's no one in the region who is going to lend a hand to Israel, except for, of course, the United States. And we're not even resident there, which means that anything we do has to be done over a very great distance. So I think the point now is that Israel is not only a pariah state, it's now, with the exception of the United States, largely alone in this war of Israel against all.
Colonel, when you speak of U.S. bribes in the region, I think you're probably talking about Jordan and Egypt.
No, I'm talking about several others beyond Jordan and Egypt. We send billions of dollars to many of the countries in the region. Obviously, Egypt is the biggest recipient, but Jordan as well. And I don't think there's much we can do about it. We bribed as much as we can. It's now become a matter of, I think, survival and also a sense of self-worth. I mean, how do you support the larger Arab cause, which is, whether we like it or not, bound up with the Palestinian matter, and still maintain relations with Israel? You can't. In fact, this morning, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia came up and said, it's time to hold the Israelis accountable for their criminal acts, and that the leadership of Israel should be held liable and appear before an international court for the crimes they've committed. I don't think we've ever heard anything like that from the Saudis.
This was the same Crown Prince who was within inches, if you'll accept that analogy, of normalizing relationships with Israel prior to October 7th and what the Israelis did in response, right?
Yeah, precisely.
If this is the little bighorn moment, and if Prime Minister Netanyahu and the IDF are George Armstrong Custer and his cavalry, who are the Indians?
I think everybody in the region. That's the point. Iranians, Arabs, Turks. And the reason I say Turks is the Turks have increasingly prepared themselves for the very high probability that they will confront Israeli forces. And they've sent 2 ships to evacuate their citizens from Lebanon. Those ships are prepared for the worst case scenario. There are aircraft on the ground in Turkey ready to launch in the event that those ships are brought under attack, which is not by any means a remote possibility. So I think you've got everyone that's essentially in the region that's against Israel. Some will be direct participants and some will not. And I think everyone is waiting for what they now think is inevitable, which is a massive response by the Israelis against Iran. And I think that Mr. Netanyahu will throw everything he's got except the kitchen sink at Iran.
And will the United States join him? Because Iran is going to be confronted by the most sophisticated Russian air defense system, is it not?
Well, it's a very sophisticated system, and they have hastily assembled it. When I say hasty, this is something that has not been thoroughly tested on the ground in Iran. There are Iranians working with the Russians. So we'll see how it works in terms of defending Iran. I suspect it'll turn in a reasonably good performance. But there's a lot more going on in Iran besides air and missile defense. There's been the arrival of large numbers of very lethal weaponry from Russia itself, including large numbers of hypersonic missiles of various ranges, both medium-range ballistic missiles and short-range ballistic missiles. There aren't any theater ballistic missiles in Iran, at least as far as we can tell, and they don't need those to reach Israel. A medium-range ballistic missile is more than enough to travel the 1,100 plus miles to reach Israel.
Are these the ones that cannot be intercepted? Hypersonic?
I'm sorry, can you say again?
Sure. Are these the projectiles that cannot be intercepted? Hypersonic?
Yeah, absolutely. These are coming in at anywhere from 4,500 to 6,000 miles per hour. We don't have the capacity to stop them. This is
Yeah. All right. Yeah, there you go. All right. Yeah, so you heard it right there. I thought that was a brilliant. I let it go a little longer than I anticipated, but I just kind of wanted to let him get those points in about Russia. But man, that right there, I almost wrecked my car. I almost wrecked my car when I heard him say that. Because it's well, here, let me just share this post.
Well, before you do that, I just want to share one little thing for people who this little image caught my attention just this week. And this is just an important thing to keep in mind. All of the red dots are U.S. military bases stationed throughout the Middle East. that's the strike range capability of Iran that, like McGregor like was mentioned. There is certain Russian missile technologies which are in many cases hypersonic, which Iran has access to. There's a lot of repercussions to Israel going off the hook and attacking Iran. And like he said, I mean, the fact that it's become clear that Netanyahu gave this speech last week at the UN where he clearly was operating in a different universe than the one that actually exists, where he was still thinking that all of these Sunni countries, Jordan and Saudi Arabia, that he called the blessing countries on his crazy map that he showed. Oh, I got very blurry there. Sorry, guys. Oh, there it is. But he actually showed this map showing all of the blessing countries around Israel, who were all the Sunni countries that had been, baked into the New World Order as part of a pro-Israel sort of front against the Shia countries, as Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski had pushed for many decades. And then the axis of evil, or whatever we call them, the cursed countries of the Shia nations of Iran, and the axis of evil. And then right after he said that, then you had a delegation representing every single Arab, Sunni, and Shia country together getting up and immediately saying in public.
The Israeli Prime Minister came here today and said that Israel is surrounded by those who want to destroy it, an enemy. We're here, members of a Muslim Arab Committee mandated by 57 Arab and Muslim countries. And I can tell you here, very unequivocally, all of us are willing to, right now, guarantee the security of Israel in the context of Israel ending the occupation and allowing for the emergence of a Palestinian state, independent state, along the efforts that we all agree. He is creating that danger because he simply does not want the two-state solution. And if he does not want the two-state solution, can you ask the Israeli officials, what is their end game? Other than just wars and wars and wars. I'm telling you, all of us in the Arab world here, we want a peace in which Israel lives in peace and security, accepted, normalized with all Arab countries in the context of ending the occupation, withdrawing from Arab territory, allowing for the emergence of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state on June 4, 1967, lies with occupied Jerusalem as capital. That is our narrative. That is, and we will guarantee Israel's security in that context. Can you ask Israelis what's their narrative other than I'm going to continue to go to war, I'm going to kill this and kill that and destroy this and this that? The amount of damage that Israeli government has done, 30 years of efforts to convince people that peace is possible, this Israeli government killed it. The amount of dehumanization, hatred, bitterness will take generations to navigate through. So ultimately the question is, we want peace. And we've laid out a plan for peace. Ask any Israeli official, what is their plan for peace? You'll get nothing, because they're only thinking of the first step. We're going to go destroy Gaza, inflame the West Bank, destroy Lebanon. And after that, they have no plan. We have a plan. We have no partner for peace in Israel. There is a partner for peace in the Arab world.
Yeah, I just thought that would be a good little thing to remind people of, as far as what reality slapped Benjamin Netanyahu in the face that leads up to what you're about to show right now.
Yeah. So this is a post I made November 16th. And I had shared out these ideas before, but I hadn't, I just consolidated it into a succinct post just because people were a lot of different things were flying around in November. And there's I was spending a lot of time on Arab Twitter at the time, as I have over the past year. And there are a lot of psyops being run on Arab Twitter where they're clearly there are bad actors trying to foment contempt and hatred towards the Crown Prince. So I was trying to subvert some of that by saying this. I said, let me remind everyone of my core thesis. MBS is on a revenge/redemption arc. Call it justice if that makes you feel better about it. Perhaps the greatest redemption arc in living memory. His target list is everybody who played a hand in 9/11, which was a plot to frame the House of Saud and destroy it. What was Bibi Netanyahu's role in 9/11? What did he do? Of course, he's on the list. They saved Israel for last because it requires a surgeon's precision. And what I was getting at there was, of course, the role that we know Bibi Netanyahu played, that's absolutely undeniable, is the fact that he went and testified as a private citizen, because there was a few years there where he wasn't prime minister. He's basically been prime minister of Israel effectively since 1995. 96 is when he officially entered office. But when Yitzhak Rabin was murdered, which Colonel Wilkerson and others have openly accused Netanyahu of being behind, and even members of Israeli Knesset have openly accused Netanyahu of being involved in plotting that. And there's a lot of supporting evidence to suggest that. Ever since Rabin was killed, Netanyahu's basically been in charge in Israel. There have been a few interim prime ministers who've stepped in and served like a single term. So he's probably there's been like 8 years total, less than that actually, where he hasn't over the past 30 years where he hasn't been prime minister. But for the most part, he's been in control of Israel. And when he wasn't prime minister, he was running around cutting deals like foreign deals with the U.S. and others to basically like build the military industrial complex in Israel, expand their military capabilities, and bring in partners to help destroy their enemies. And the most important and critical moment of that was in 2002 when he went and testified. I think it was September 2002. He went and testified as a private citizen in Congress and told Congress, if you kill Saddam Hussein, overthrow Iraq, overthrow Iran, and he said explicitly, if you kill Saddam Hussein and overthrow the Iraqi government, that will bring a lasting permanent peace to the Middle East. But he also suggested that we overthrow the governments of Afghanistan, which we ended up doing, and the government of Iran. Which we didn't do, but we did overthrow Afghanistan and we did overthrow Iraq. So he got 2 out of the 3 things he wanted. And then he also said, and once we kill Saddam, that will then empower us to do the others. And by the others, he was referring to Syria, Lebanon, and eventually everyone. I mean, the idea is to overthrow everyone in the Middle East.
Yeah. Iran's always been a big trophy there to get to, but that's actually something that people forget, that we were on the verge of war with Iran back in December or November of 2007, and it was during this 3-day period where Dick Cheney went in for heart surgery. I guess he still had like a little smidgen of a heart left that they had to work on. And he was out of commission. And that moment, that was when the national intelligence estimate dropped. That was a fact that revealed that he had been lying, because all of the media, press outlets, Fox, everybody was in lockstep pushing for this idea that we had evidence that weapons of mass destruction had been built. They were on the verge of having weapons grade uranium in Iran. And everything was in motion. Everything was ready to attack Iran. And then with this NIE report, it basically admitted that actually the real intelligence that the U.S. military and Pentagon had was that Iran had abandoned all weapons grade enrichment of uranium ambitions over 7 years earlier, that there was a total fatwa on the development of nuclear weapons, but that they had actually obeyed it, that there was no evidence whatsoever. And that took all the wind out of the sails of war. So we came close, but there was a patriotic faction within military intelligence that derailed that war. That could have been like a real end time situation, because at that point in 2007, we were living through an economic crisis that could have been easily the catalyzer for a total disintegration of the system. Israel was, under Netanyahu, they were frothing at the mouth. They had just suffered a bit of an embarrassment with their Israeli-Lebanese conflict in 2006, and they wanted a quick revenge. And so the whole Greater Israel mechanism was raging, and that could have been the big war. Again, the multipolar alliance of Russia, China, India had not really developed that much. The BRICS hadn't really come into existence yet. So there was no real counterfight except for this faction within U.S. military. And I don't know what happened to those heroes who did that, who stopped that war from happening at this point. But that was a big deal that we've forgotten about.
Yeah. So I wanted to share this. This is so in the 1980s, we orchestrated a war between Iran and Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And Iran and Iraq at the time were equivalent powers. So basically, you had Iran. Iran is a massive country with a lot of resources and a lot of people, and without any other factors like external factors manipulating the region, Iran is probably poised to become the natural center of influence in the Middle East in all likelihood. Just given its history, given its people, given its access to resources, its geographic location, its allies. There's a number of reasons why they probably would become the center of power, or at least one of the major centers of power. Maybe Egypt or potentially Turkey could do that, and then Saudi Arabia has obviously positioned itself as a very strong diplomatic power for sure. But the idea was to basically use Iraq as a battering ram against Iran. Also use Iran against a battering ram against Iraq, because that softened up Iraq. And then with Desert Storm in the early 90s, we went into Saudi Arabia, use it as a staging ground to invade, to go into Kuwait and Iraq and beat them up a little bit more. And then we came back 10 years later and finished off the job. After 9/11 at the behest of Bibi Netanyahu. And so I want to play this video of Saddam Hussein publicly apologizing to the Iranian people and explaining that this was all conspiracy by the West to destroy the Middle East for the war. So he's speaking in Arabic or some foreign, some dialect from over there. So I'm just gonna scrub through the video because it's big blocks of text, and I'm just gonna read what he says, because I know a lot of people are probably listening and not watching. So let me do that real quick, and then we can kind of talk about it. But he says the conspiracy began with the Iraq-Iran war. It was a distraction for Iraq. On the other hand, it was a distraction to prevent us to see Iran's benevolent sides. The West and Gulf Cooperation Council states, that's like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Arab states in the Persian Gulf, wanted to reveal the Iranian side that brings things to disaster. Certainly those who were feeding this conspiracy are the same parties of the international coalition now, whether the so-called Arab ones or foreign ones. They specifically wanted to prolong the war. The general plan of these same parties that all are allied today, whether they hold an Arab or foreign nationality, we're all working, and we now know that they were working to prolong the war between Iraq and Iran. The Iranians forget what they were thinking about us during the war and want to deal with us now in a realistic manner as neighbors and develop common interests. It is a blessing from God that there is someone that we were at war with for 8 years, and he does not bear hatred, does not hold grudges, has a desire for cooperation, and does not gloat over his enemy. Where do you find these qualities? Among the idealists, among the believers. So, yeah, and we're not going to play it, but I would also recommend, I mean, if you go on X, you can pretty easily find the clip of Saddam Hussein being sentenced by the kangaroo court that sentenced him to death. And I would just encourage people to go listen to what he says. And you can't, when I say listen, you got to read the caption, but listen to what, like, as the judge is reading, like, we're going to kill you now. Listen to what he says in defiance in the face of him being told he's going to be executed. And I think it doesn't, again, just like with Iran, it doesn't, like when I write about Iran, I said this on the brief the other day, it doesn't mean that they're the opposite of everything we've been told. And it doesn't mean that they're a pure heart of gold, but it does mean that it's a side to them that we haven't been told about. And it means that they probably aren't exactly the thing that Lindsey Graham wants us to think.
Yeah, at the very least. And you certainly don't see pictures like this as well. You know, like, keep in mind what Saddam just said, which is mind blowing. I don't know when he said that, but I've never heard that speech. That's fantastic. But this is 1983, so you know that's Donald Rumsfeld right there, the guy who's working with Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was brought in through Team B on the Carter administration, actually Gerald Ford earlier, with the whole Trilateral Commission takeover of America that rewired American foreign policy in the 1970s towards a break from its previous traditions of supporting the aspirations of colonial people to have access of high technology, full development, which was the ambition of people like John F. Kennedy. You know, read the policy statements of Robert F. Kennedy Sr. Before he was murdered. He had a similar policy of helping those help themselves who had been abused throughout the Middle East, throughout South America, throughout Africa. And that was the spirit of the real America. And that was abandoned consciously. That was attacked by the David Rockefeller, Kissinger, Zbigniew Trilateral Commission takeover, which said, no, the new policy, the new framework is going to be, we are going to expand and project power, and we're going to use proxies like what they did with the radicalizing madrasas. That will be the new way to weaponize and to bring out the most violent variations or perversions within the Islamic world, within all of our allies, so that they will become proxies in forever wars that will allow those countries to remain undeveloped, so that their resources under the sand or under the land of African or Middle Eastern countries can be better exploited. Because if those countries have peace and development and they can build their own manufacturing, the way so many Saudi leaders and Pakistani leaders and there's so many anti-imperial heroes throughout the world, many of whom got overthrown by CIA coups or assassinations, of which there were hundreds. But if that happens, then it's very difficult for us to steal their stuff. So that was the new paradigm. And you could just see how Saddam Hussein, against his own, you're dealing with the most powerful country in the world that comes to your door with the military industrial complex of the United States, saying that you're going to go to war. And Saddam Hussein was not an angel. He was not to be forgiven for his bad decisions. However, he was able to discover and speak loudly about how he was manipulated by figures that Rumsfeld represented, which was he was representing the military industrial complex that made billions supplying weapons to Iraq in that proxy war of getting Muslims to kill Muslims for geopolitical purposes. So, yeah.
And the purpose, like from doing research on this, the purpose that Iraq really served from the West standpoint, if you were an earnest believer in the West and a lot of the proto neocon rhetoric, what the purpose that they were serving is that they were they were like the backstop. They were the wall defending Arabia and the Middle East at large from Iran, which the belief is that if Iraq fell, Iran would infiltrate westward. The Shia would act on their ancient rivalry with the Sunni and basically seek to retake the whole, like what they perceive to be the Holy Land, what they perceive to be the holy mosques from the control of the Sunni, and kind of try to reestablish a sort of caliphate or empire, or at least make them vassals of the Shia. And, through proxy networks, wars, guerrilla warfare, whatever. I mean, whatever jihad they had to wage to do that. And that's actually kind of what we're seeing, at least from a narrative standpoint, play out now, where you have this network of proxy groups that are operating against Israel that are all said to be connected to Iran. And so it's like that narrative is playing out to a certain extent. It's certainly not playing in the way maybe with neighbors, they were supposed to establish a real, and they were supposed to be attacked, I think, by Iran, antagonized into war with Iran, and then with the backing of their Arab neighbors and the U.S. coalition and Europe and Britain, they would then descend on Iran and go to war with Iran. A number of factors obviously interrupted that. I think the number one factor, in my opinion, is Mohammed bin Salman. I think he's the number one factor, making peace last November with Iran and bearing the hatchet between them. I think is the singular reason that we are, or the single most important reason, I should say, that we are not seeing a complete all-out war between Persia and Arabia right now. Because, back in 2018, when Trump was president, MBS was openly saying Iran is our greatest enemy, and we will do whatever we have to do to oppose them and to oppose Qatar.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this gets at, so you made the point that McGregor outlined something that you had already predicted was going to happen, I think correctly so, that there would be a new phase of clampdown, of pressure against Benjamin Netanyahu, and that crazy faction of temple cult revival, right? Or temple, what would you call it? The Solomon Temple revival cult that's taken over control of a big chunk of the Zionist state. That is now we're seeing it, but we've been seeing signs of this already for the past several years. You know, I think it's important to keep in mind that MBS, or actually before even MBS got into full power in 2014, Saudi Arabia broke its ties with the Muslim Brotherhood. They cut off funding in 2017. They totally cut ties, and MBS, the Muslim Brotherhood's operations had to move to Qatar as their headquarters, and or Hamas's operations went to Qatar after they had been in Damascus. This is already a little bit earlier during the when it became apparent that the U.S. was going to start attacking Syria after they destroyed Libya. So they got their asset Hamas out of Syria's jurisdiction and into Qatar as their new home base, and Qatar sort of tried to pick up the slack for what was lacking. But MBS has been really doing a purge of so many different aspects of this Anglo-American apparatus that is the deep state of the Arab world, starting with the Muslim Brotherhood, which had deep penetrations. They'd been working with the Anglo-Zionists in sort of manufacturing 9/11, or helping to make 9/11 happen. That was done with people like Prince Bandar bin Sultan, or Bandar Bush, as they called him, who was the Saudi ambassador to the United States and a big point man, a big friend of the Bush family going back to the 80s. And he was a key point man. But MBS has been doing purges of this agency over the last several years. So we've seen a lot of pushback. We've seen the same thing also in Turkey, where Erdogan, who had been playing along for a long time with this Muslim Brotherhood agency, has finally shown some cojones and has been really purging as well, taking down this fifth column. So we've seen it in all of these different countries. We've seen it in Jordan as well. Jordan has been the loudest nation calling for a NATO of the Middle East up until not that long ago. And now we've seen a total break where even Jordan is saying, no, that was a bad idea. Just like Putin saying, oh yeah, maybe, in 2004, Putin was saying, yeah, maybe Russia should join NATO. Because there was still the idea that maybe these transatlantic institutions could be nudged towards acting rationally if they joined. But it's become clear that no, it's cultish ideologues in London, in Brussels, in Washington, in Tel Aviv who are actually at the helm, and you can't transform these sorts of institutions into something reasonable. So we're seeing now finally I think a complete shift. So anything else on that front that MBS is doing?
Well, it's really important, I think, to understand that, because I know people look at the UN and they look at these globalist organizations that seem to be serving the unipolar hegemony. And from what I can tell, and I've been writing about this a lot for a while now, it seems like they, specifically the Saudis, but I think others are doing it too. But I think the Saudis have been the most dynamic in their ability to do this. Is it going around the world and establishing bilateral agreements, trade agreements with all these different countries, key players in the UN, key players in the Security Council, building relationships with them, and the real thing that they have to offer, like the sweetener, the reason that everyone is always eager to meet the Saudis is because of the PIF, the Public Investment Fund, and then of course MBS's announcement that they are looking to divest out of oil, which is what one of the foundations of his rule was going to be, was that they sold immediately in order to pull them out of insolvency, because they were facing, I've talked about before how they were facing insolvency at the end of 2017. In order to pull them out of that, they sold 5% of Aramco. Aramco is always been a private business, so meaning none of their bookkeeping has ever been public, like you would with a publicly traded company. And so the speculation has always been that Aramco's used it to fund terrorism. They're like, well, Aramco's obvious, we speculate that Aramco's worth trillions of dollars, and that's the Saudi national oil company with a lot of American interest in it, by the way. And we suspect that Aramco is the reason that terrorism exists, because of Aramco. And so now, with offering to sell 5% of the company back in, whatever it was, 2017, 2018, had to create public books. There is like public reporting now to Aramco. I'm not familiar with the figures, but it's worth trillions of dollars. I think I want to say they've actually offered more than the 5%. I think they came back with a second offering as well. And basically what they're doing is they're taking that money and they're going and investing in everything else. They're diversifying their investment. I'm pretty sure Trump is the one. Not that Trump needed to be the one to tell them this. I'm sure there's some very smart people there who can figure it out for themselves. But the idea that oil is here and now, but you should be thinking about where you are in 25, 50 years, 25 years, 50 years. Like if oil isn't the center of everything, like if we are in a new energy environment, a new energy like ecosystem, oil may not be worth anything. Like compared to what it is now. So you should be thinking about that now. So they've gone out and they've bought 10% of Heathrow Airport in London. They've bought, the soccer league. They've bought the PGA. They've MMA fighting, massive investments in Silicon Valley, where they're like all these emerging video game leagues that are worth millions of dollars, probably billions of dollars. As Burning Bright has talked about before, the video game industry completely eclipses the movie and film industry by multiple orders of magnitude. Like the average successful video game makes like 10 to 100 times more than the average successful movie. So it's and it's far easier to produce because you're not dealing with like actors or like on a set and all the politics of Hollywood or anything like that. Right. So really, like a lot of smart financial moves, the Saudis go out and invest, are looking to form bilateral trade agreements. The bilateral trade agreements are then used to leverage political clout on the global stage. So we're seeing the UN kind of have these schizophrenic moments where the UN will side with the unipolar hegemony, but then they'll also will side with the global South, the interests of Saudi Arabia and China. So it's interesting to see the factions of the UN, in my opinion, turned against its masters, turned against the globalists. When they issued, when the ICJ, and we've talked about the ICJ before, the International Criminal Court, which was created by George Soros 20 some years ago, and is totally illegitimate. That's the one that issues the actual issues like criminal indictments where they want to go arrest these people, these leaders. When they talked about issuing an indictment against Netanyahu or a warrant for arrest against Netanyahu, that was when the UN, all the globalist UN people started freaking out, and they were saying, "Wait a minute, this thing was created. This court was created to go after African leaders and terrorists. It wasn't and Putin. It wasn't created to go after, legitimate world leaders like Netanyahu." So you really are seeing, I think, the total crippling of the globalist system as I see it. Whether the UN even exists as we currently see it in the future, it remains to be seen. It's very obvious that the EU isn't going to exist. NATO is not going to exist. I think you might get coalition. You might have like these organizations, these trade organizations that are really more about fraternity than it is about actually establishing trade regulation. Because it seems that all of these countries are now pivoting towards bilateral trade agreements because that's what's in their best interest. It's easier to make a mutually beneficial deal than to deal with some bloviated bureaucratic trade organization who's going to tell you what you can and can't do with your trade partners.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people give, China or a lot of countries of the East a hard time for having allowed themselves to join things like the World Trade Organization, which itself came out of the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, that was set up in the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. So the World Trade Organization is a body which has as its primary mandate the maintenance of a globalized system of dependency under a transnational elite that sort of revolves around certain groupings like the Davos Forum, or even higher up in the chain of command, the Bilderberger Group, which is sort of the upper crust, top level management of this machinery, this anti-nation state, anti-human machinery. And that's sort of the purpose. Now, on the surface, when you just look at the World Trade Organization or the earlier General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, but I'd say especially the WTO, if you just take it at face value, it's kind of like free trade, like the argument of Adam Smith, if you're in the Wealth of Nations. It seems fine. It seems like it's all based upon rules, trade rules tied to economic competition, right? Frowning upon trade barriers in order to enhance fair, competitive rules out of which could emerge new creative innovations that could be applied to making life better. It seems fine on the surface, but the thing is, it's all very apolitical. Just like Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, does he ever talk about the existence of the British East India Company that he is devoted to, that he's on the payroll for, as an ideologue representing the interests of the British Empire? No, not at all. It's all this abstract world that doesn't exist, where there are no City of London supranational agencies trying to subvert nations and humanity, or keep the world enslaved to a master class priesthood. No, they create rules that they want naive people to abide by, but the people who made the rules had never an intention to abide by those rules. They were always going to run, whatever they could as far as economic terrorism, right? Speculate against countries' currencies or whatever. Carry out sanctions if you're the United States that has the world dependent upon the US dollar as the basis of all settling balance of payments. Then you could use sanctions unilaterally to crush nations' abilities to have economic independence. If you wanted to, if they're not behaving according to the type of mandate you want them to do, then you could break them, punish them, and have them reevaluate their behavior as they bleed and crawl back into the citadel of globalization, which is run by a hegemon. So, you could say, if you simply look at the World Trade Organization or even the UN as a bureaucratic entity with a bunch of thousands of legal documents and there's nothing overtly evil about it. And so you could feasibly, as has been done throughout history, if you're a power with an honest agency behind you, you could influence bad things towards the good. You could maybe even bring about a healing process by getting into agencies that have been misused in order to make them behave according to their original mandate, which I believe the GATT, the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944, had an honest anti-imperial agency or intention behind it originally, which enshrines the sovereignty of nation states in the UN Charter. It enshrines the idea of fair trade within certain rules of international economic trade. So you could do that, but it requires a lot of sophistication to do it. And I think that, the Chinese and others thought that they could nudge these things towards sanity. Didn't work that well. Didn't work. It's so now we've got a different type of thing where we're seeing now coming online ever more, and we're going to see some big things happening in Kazan on October 21st, 22nd at the BRICS Summit in Russia. It's about an 8-hour drive from Moscow. It's a big summit, and there's going to be some big announcements of a new economic architecture that's going to take a new phase of development. Since they couldn't work within the system, we're seeing now increasingly the development of a system outside of the SWIFT, outside of the Washington, London controlled zone of empire. And hopefully we can start looking at that not as a rival or an enemy to be destroyed, but something that we also could learn from and even cooperate with if we want to heal. So yeah, just going back now to the Middle East, because you definitely have, as you were talking, I was thinking about Aramco, and if you look at just the Middle East in general, they've been dependent. I've shown this image so many times. It was done by the Schiller Institute, but this is a composite of all of the different projects that have been discussed, put into one beautiful image that I really like, of the Trans-Arabian high-speed rail network. These are all being discussed. There's policy platforms, papers that have been written. In some cases, the projects that are in red have already been built, like the Chabahar port through Islamabad, or the Djibouti Addis Ababa railway. In some cases, they're either being built, as in the case of some of the green lines, or are still simply in planning and feasibility study phase. But this is the intention. This is where things are moving, is to break free of oil dependency and build full spectrum economies. That Saudi Arabia is doing open business with China, building up civilian nuclear energy capabilities. So is the UAE. You got the same thing for a bunch of African nations as well, working with Rosatom. Egypt is having Russia build 4 nuclear power reactors that are nearly finished. South Africa as well is seeing an upgrade. So you got this all across the board. It's a new paradigm that is much more competent, much more sane, and based upon an idea of long-term thinking and peace, that you can only develop these things if you're not all at war with each other. So that's
can you bring that map up?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So check out, if you like, I don't know if you can zoom in, but just if you can circle that little bridge between the Strait of Hormuz.
Mm-hmm.
If you could circle that with your
can
mouse.
You see my mouse?
No, I can't. But
I can't. I just did a screen share. I can't really manipulate it, I don't think.
Okay. Well, anyway, if you can see right there where it says Guadar Chabar, it says
right
Guadar.
below
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can see, everyone can see on the screen, there's a green line. That's the high-speed railroad, and it goes up through Yemen, through Oman, and then it breaks off and goes back into Saudi Arabia, or it keeps going straight up towards Iran. And what they've been talking about is a bridge that actually crosses the Strait of Hormuz right there into Iran. And that point right there is actually Oman. Oman, very, very skinny. It maintains the coastline, and then it expands back out. And that point at the end of that peninsula is actually part of Oman, which is that country down there in the corner. Next to it is the UAE, and then Qatar is that much smaller peninsula that juts out into the Persian Gulf. Obviously, that would be a massive infrastructure project that would totally transform the region, to have a high-speed rail running between Bandar Abbas, is the port that's right there. It's the new port they just built in Iran, and it's a critical hub within the north-south transportation corridor that we've talked about, the thing that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has organized. And Saudi Arabia has invested, by the way, in the Bandar Abbas port. They've also been receiving shipments. There was a big story about it 2 years ago. I think we talked about it last week, but they've been receiving shipments from Russia through the Bandar Abbas port. So they have a vested interest in having relations with Iran, being on a positive footing with them, because then they can build this bridge, a high-speed rail between Iran and basically Saudi Arabia, and Persia. It fundamentally changes everything. That is a massive. I can't even begin to overstate how that would change the world in a very, very positive way. Just that one thing alone. But there's a lot of politics that has to be sorted out. There's a lot of buffoonery that has to be sorted out before we get there. And I know we've been up spending a lot of time talking about this, but let's spend a few minutes getting back to the Middle East and talking about Muslim Brotherhood. I never anticipated getting through the full deep dive on the Muslim Brotherhood today, because there's so much to it.
Yeah.
It's probably something that we keep coming back to as things develop. The thing that inspired me to talk about him today was the Eric Adams indictment, which I hadn't had a chance to read about, but I finally have. And basically it ties him to Turkey. Turkish officials were giving him free stuff, free flights, access to Turkish Airlines, access to top resorts, top hotels around the world, paying for him to fly around and go on vacation, him and his staff, those kind of gifts. And then when the time came, sometime in the 2000s, I think, or I'm sorry, no, it was I say 2000s, 2022, I think is when it was. He gets a call 2021, 2022, something like that, from these people, is Turkish businessman, and he says, "Hey, we have this building, the Turkish consular that we've been constructing. We're trying to get it open before Erdogan comes to New York City. We need you to lean on the fire department, because they're holding up our certificate of occupancy. They won't give it to us." And it was because the building wasn't up to code with the fire code yet. And so Adams was able to get that approved, even though it didn't meet code. And that's like the primary allegation in the indictment. All the other, it's multiple charges, but they're all kind of related to that. But that relationship that proves the pay for play. And then there's a lot of text messages, deleting text messages, acknowledging to his collaborators that, don't worry, I'm going to delete every text message that we're exchanging. There's acknowledgement that we are breaking the law right now, but we're going to delete text messages. And they're never going to be able to get our text messages if we just delete them from our phone. So, yeah, a little bit of idiocy. So there are people like Paul Sperry, who I think is a great reporter, speculating that this is Muslim Brotherhood evidence. I haven't seen that yet. There's not enough in the indictment to suggest the Muslim Brotherhood is involved. However, the Muslim Brotherhood is connected to Erdogan, and it is connected to Turkey in a lot of ways. You were mentioning, we were talking about the 1980s. We were talking about Iran and Iraq and the things happening there. 1967, the 6-Day War, which we talk about a lot, that was when the IDF occupied Gaza, the West Bank. They still are in the West Bank. They occupied the Golan Heights. They're still in the Golan Heights. They also occupied the Sinai Peninsula, down the giant peninsula in between, that's on the eastern part of Egypt, that's in between the mainland Egypt and Arabia. And they were there until the Camp David Accords. They were there for about 13 years. Camp David Accords in 1979 between Jimmy Carter and the players in the region, Israel and Egypt. And this is back then, Egypt was the main power in the Middle East. And the deal was that the IDF would pull out of the Sinai Peninsula. They would maintain control of Gaza. They would be the ones in control of Gaza as opposed to Egypt, because Egypt, up until the 6-Day War, Egypt had been the protectorate of Gaza. So Gaza was considered, a territory, like an Egyptian territory, and it was Egypt's job to police Gaza. And so one of a policy that Egypt had long had throughout the 20th century was they had a zero tolerance for the Muslim Brotherhood. If you got caught and you were a Muslim Brotherhood operative, they'd execute you. And that was the policy in Palestine too. If they caught anybody running around who was a Muslim Brotherhood affiliate, they'd kill you. And so for that reason, the Muslim Brotherhood was kept out of, because I think they understood the modern Muslim Brotherhood was founded by the British intelligence in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna. I have some of that information we'll talk about in a minute. So Egypt knew that it was a British intelligence outfit, and that it was subversive in nature, and it was designed basically to radicalize Muslims using kind of the worst ideas from some of the worst people, some of the worst theologians in terms of their outlook, with very radical ideas as it relates to Islam. Hadith is what it's called. So Hadith is the idea. I think I'm saying that right. It's kind of the same thing that we see with Bezalel Smotrich and the current his desire with his doctrine, the Smotrich doctrine, to establish like a theocracy in Israel, where he wants to give the rabbis the power to dictate law. Like, rabbis say, here's how you pray, here's what you're allowed to do on Saturday, here's what you're allowed to do in the evening, here's how men and women should interact, and then the religious police would be the ones to enforce that. That's exactly how it works in the Salafi Wahhabi world, which is created by these scholars who were funded in the 1880s and the 1890s in Cairo by Britain. I've heard you talk about that before. And then ultimately that culminates the students of those schools that were all set up by, well, let's just get to it. I'm going to throw my screen up there. So this guy, Garnet Wosley, he is established as, so he's in the East India Company. He's serving in India. And then I think is he the guy who gets I'm making sure I have my notes right here. He's the one who's established as the comptroller of Egypt. And so he's established as the comptroller of Egypt when Egypt by Britain, when Britain takes control of the
Suez Canal.
Suez Canal. Yep. Thank you. So Suez Canal, because they built the Suez Canal as a French, English, and an Egyptian endeavor. The Egyptians go bankrupt because after the it's connected to the Civil War. The Civil War, because of the Civil War, there was an embargo on cotton from the South, which were basically effectively removed the Confederacy from, or American cotton from the international marketplace. Once that was all resolved, that cotton then flooded onto the market, which drove the price of cotton down. And the number one place for cotton in the world comes from Egypt. You probably heard the Mike Lindell Giza Sheets advertisements. So that then drives the price of cotton down. It kind of destroys the Egyptian economy to a certain extent. Egypt is not able to make its payments on the loans it had taken out to build the canal with France and Britain. And basically Britain comes in and buys up all their shares, and Britain then owns the Suez Canal outright. Britain and France, the oligarchs, own the Suez Canal outright. So then they say, all right, well, to make sure that our interests are protected here, we're going to deploy the British military. We're going to deploy our people to Egypt, and Egypt is now basically under our control because we have to, your government is completely bankrupt and can't fend for itself. So you are now basically our underling, our vassal. And that's in the late 1800s. And then the guy who they appoint to be in charge there comes from the East India Company. He comes from India. That's where all of his experience was. And one of the things he does is he says, oh, the schools here are garbage. I mean, this is an argument that's going to sound very familiar to a lot of Americans right now. The schools here are unreliable, and who knows what they're teaching your kids. Let us fund schools for you so that all your children can be educated, because the infrastructure here is crippled because of the ineptitude of your government. And so they establish all these schools, and the schools, of course, are teaching Salafi Islam and all these radical ideas that the guys who were on the British payroll were fomenting. And so then decades later, 1928, they borrow this idea from the Saudis. The Saudis were the ones who created the original Muslim Brotherhood and then destroyed it after British intelligence infiltrated it. They then Hassan al-Banna, and then have that right here. Where's that? Right down. I'll zoom out further.
I got a picture of him if you want. That guy.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Hassan al-Banna. So this is the guy best known for founding the Muslim Brotherhood. He warned Muslims against the quote, because this is something I've actually looked into. This is true from what I can discern. This is true. He warned Muslims against the quote widespread belief that jihad of the heart was more important than jihad of the sword. And so basically, for a very long time, jihad was associated with this idea of improving yourself. It was like self-improvement. It's called jihad of the heart. So it's basically it's like removing the evil elements from your mind and your soul in order to cleanse yourself of sin, basically. It's like going to war with yourself in order to seek self-improvement. And so
it's similar.
I'm sorry.
It's similar to the healthy side of the Protestant fight of faith versus works, right? Between where, you on the one hand, you had the Lutherans saying, no, salvation is through faith, which again could be sloppy and lazy as well, where people could just say, oh, I'm not going to help that person drowning because I got faith that they're going to go to heaven and I'm a good person. And it's like, well, no, you kind of have to do stuff too. But at the same time, if you do it the right way, as you just said, where you really self-examine and you clean up your soul and you clean up your vices and you try to work on virtue, then that's true. That's the core, that like 1 Corinthians 13 stuff, right? Like if I sing with the tongues of angels and hath not love or agape, it's like clanging cymbals. So it's true, versus those who wanted only the behavior of action, of works only, and it doesn't matter what you think inside, because it's for the priests to be the conduits of the divine, not for the plebes. They're supposed to just be cogs in a machine of government of some sort, where they're obedient, and then they'll get rewarded by heaven. But you get this false sort of debate in some ways, because obviously they both work together, and you have the same thing manifest theologically within the Muslim world as well, between, as you just said here, those who had jihad of the heart, like go to war with your own demons first before you try to change the world, versus those who just want to get straight into purging the world of evil outside and chasing monsters to destroy, John Quincy Adams warned against. Don't go around the world chasing monsters to destroy as American foreign policy. Like, clean up your own act first before you start moralizing other nations.
Because they might follow you home, I think is what he said, right? Don't go around chasing monsters because they might follow you home. Yeah. And so all great points and well said. And so what these guys were doing, and this also, by the way, this explains why Gertrude Bell, she's called the female Lawrence of Arabia. She was raised by her father was an aristocrat who was appointed to I forget, it's either the East India Company or the No, it wouldn't have been in the East India Company, because at that point that was dissolved. But it would have been the British Foreign Office. He was appointed to Iran, so she was basically raised in Iran from a young age. She loved the Middle East. She thought it was amazing. Iran was obviously not the repressive state that it is now. And then around between, I think it was the year 1901 when she basically became an adult, until she committed suicide in 1926, I think it was 26 years. She is going around the Middle East by herself as a grown woman, and she's running archaeological digs. She's collaborating with people in Iraq. She's primarily in Iraq. She's there throughout World War One. She's serving as like a British spy in World War One, embedded with the Iraqis, the same way Lawrence of Arabia was embedded with the Hashemites down in Arabia. And she's never once experienced any issues. She was never once robbed or mugged. There's no reports of her being mugged or raped or messed with, the way that you would expect anybody, not just a woman, but anybody traveling throughout the Middle East right now by themselves over the past 25 years, probably would have had one or two run-ins with some shady characters, it's safe to say. So how do you explain that? How do you explain a British woman traveling around the Middle East for 25 years and never experiencing the kind of problems that you would expect if this version of Islam that we've been taught to is real Islam has existed for centuries and centuries and centuries? Obviously, it hasn't. Obviously, it's a newly cultivated idea. It comes from this idea of the jihad of the sword. Go with the jihad of the sword, commit violence against your enemies, kill in the name of God, which should sound very, very familiar to Christians who are being told by Lindsey Graham that God will only love you if you go kill Muslims, which of course is one of the most satanic ideas you could possibly put forth. And so Albana is taught by this guy, Rashid Rida, and Matt, you may have some coloring to add about him, but he's one, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's the one who it's either him or Abdu. So I think he is the successor to Abdu.
Muhammad Abdu came first. He was the follower of the disciple of Al-Afghani, and then Abdu codified the Salafist doctrine after Al-Afghani sort of set the stage for it, working for the British. And then Rashid Rida came after.
That's right. Yeah. Al-Afghani was the one. He's the one who was on this guy's or not, I don't have him here, but Worsley, the guy who I was just showing, he was on his payroll. The guy who came over and became the comptroller of Britain, of Egypt for Britain. He's on his payroll. Mm-hmm. And the idea was the guy was supposed to help him set up schools and, basically try to establish a sense of governance in this situation that they were saying this, the government's bankrupt and it needs our help. So we need to rebuild Cairo and rebuild the Egyptian society. So that's what allows the British intelligence to come in there, set up shop, and start cultivating this radicalism, which takes several decades to manifest into something that can actually be weaponized. You have to have several generations of people who've been taught these ideas to not only hate non-Muslims, but also hate other Muslims who weren't living up to the standard that's being established by these people who are actually subverting the religion itself.
Yeah. Can I show a picture?
Of course.
Well?
Yeah.
This is interesting. And what you said is so important. I mean, that the subversion of these religions, there's always these external forces. Usually, typically, when you scratch the surface, they're tied to Gnostic mystery cults that are acting like they're putting on a chameleon sort of skin in order to infiltrate and subvert various target cultural groupings from within. That works to the degree that those people don't self-examine. If they don't actually work on really doing what Plato says that everybody must do before you get into, as you mature, before you try to do politics, you have to self-examine, learn how your heart and mind work. And if you don't do that and you walk out into the world with blind spots, those blind spots will be capitalized by those who seek to have you destroy yourself. Because the empire doesn't really need to go and physically destroy everybody. They get people who are not self-aware to take on prejudices, to inflame certain ego traits that make them weaponizable, that ultimately undermines their own self-interest. So that's sort of what these guys did. And these are 4 pictures that I found of one guy, Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani. 4 pictures. And a lot of very astute Muslim scholars are very aware of how this guy has really run roughshod, undermining the Muslim faith over the last 140 years, or his ideas. Now, he has a little quote, a famous quote, where he says, "We do not cut the head of religion except by the sword of religion." And he makes it very clear, and this was repeated by his disciple, Muhammad, forgot his name now, that you just showed the picture of. Abdu, yeah. Who becomes the Mufti of Egypt under Lord Cromer, and aka Evelyn Baring of Baring Bank, who installs him as the Mufti of Egypt, and did exactly what.
That's who it was, Evelyn Baring. He that's the guy who's I couldn't find him on my map, so I kind of panicked. But yeah, Evelyn Baring of Baring Bank, and Baring Bank is also connected to the I think the American Revolution, if I'm not mistaken. I think Baring Bank funded the Hashim or the Hessen
Soldiers,
mercenaries.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all connected to one thing, because the British think globally. They think holistically about the world, but they do it with a very bad anti-human theology. So it's good for us to get to practice thinking about that global chemistry. Now, this is on the right-hand side. That's a picture of him dressed up, and it's been discovered through different facial recognition. He was dressed up as this figure that he would take on these different personalities. So he would be a cosmopolitan when he'd go to England or to France, and he would be part of these different Freemasonic networks. He was a leading member, a Grand Master of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, along with Helena Blavatsky, as well as John Yarker, the guy who oversaw the Memphis Misraim Freemasonic Lodge. John Yarker was Albert Pike's second in command at the southern branch of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, Albert Pike being a Confederate general, one of the leading figures of the Knights of the Golden Circle. And so John Yarker, as they always do with these weird, like, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, Rosicrucian orders, is they do these breakaways. They create a conflict, they break off, then they create two more subgroups, like I think of it like a Hydra's head. You cut off one head, two more grow. And they always do this subdivision. So then Yarker says, "Oh no, I've got a new interpretation of how to decrypt some hieroglyph that somebody showed me in secret. And that gives me a new insight into how to conduct these mystery degrees." And so he creates a different branch of the Memphis Misraim faith, or not faith. I shouldn't call it that at all. It's a secret cult, which Aleph Ghani also as a part of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, has big penetrations into the United States as well. A lot of the leading Confederates who go on to found the KKK, as well as northern abolitionist, like the northern jurisdiction of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, that were running the abolition movement before and during the Civil War. There's honest abolitionists, but then there were the dishonest ones that just wanted to abolish the Constitution and create a smaller pro-British Northern Confederation, right? What they also set up these Hermetic orders of Luxor that Aleph Ghani, Blavatsky were parts of. Now, he founds Salafism as sort of a philosophical school that takes a very rigid interpretation of script of the Quran, and this becomes the backbone, as you pointed out, of Wahhabism, of a lot of those interpretations that of what Islam was, that dehumanize those who are not following that very specific interpretation of Islam, which is why most casualties of Islamic terrorism are Muslims. They're not Jews or Christians, although they also get killed. But it's primarily, in a large measure, it's Muslims killing Muslims. But it's this idea that if you're not following our particular brand, but the irony is that the guy who creates this rigid interpretation is himself a Sufi mystic. He's a Grand Master of the Freemasons of Egypt, leader of the Brotherhood of Luxor. He's traveling around the world with Madame Blavatsky. He's fomenting conflict in Afghanistan. Like, he's the one who's leading the what is it? There's an uprising in Afghanistan that it then justifies the British going in, that ushers in the Anglo-Afghan War, that involves the British coming out of it with full controls over Afghanistan. And he's the one who is sort of the spark plug for that. But so he actually doesn't respect, he wants to destroy religion. and he himself, as he is here on the right hand side, this is a picture of him posing as this figure named Haji Sharif, and he inspired this guy Saint Yves d'Alexandre, a French founder of synarchism. In the legend of Agartha, this mystery world in the Hollow Earth, where these Atlanteans have been survivors, have been sort of waiting in the wait to take over the world in some new Shambhala weird thing. So this guy's just everywhere. And this, by the way, is Madame Blavatsky, for those who don't know, with her little symbol of the Ouroboros and the swastika and the Ankh as well, which is sort of the symbol of this syncretic world religion that Blavatsky, the controller of the Theosophists, was trying to bring about, was taking sort of the most mystical, superstitious, mystery, Gnostic elements of different religions and create a hybrid new religious order with like an inner teaching for the elite and an outer teaching for the stupid people.
Yeah.
And so they were all working together to do the same thing.
Which, by the way, is I believe, because Ash and I have had discussions about this, Ash in America, isn't that's in the scripture in the Bible to describe the Antichrist, is that they would the goal of the Antichrist would be to merge all the religions of the world into one global religion that basically controlled everybody.
Which part of scripture is that in? Is that in Revelation or something?
You'd have to go to Ash. Ash reads beyond just what is in the book of Revelation. She has a lot of other scriptures. She's so I have to defer to her on all of the stuff when it comes to what's it called? Eschatology.
Eschatological
stuff.
I stumbled on that word too.
Yeah. But the end of days stuff, the end of days prophecy, like she's very, very well read at all that. So I had to kind of defer to her and all that. I won't speak for her, but her and I have gone deep into that. And her and I have had debates before, and we were supposed to do it on camera, and we probably still will. That, her assertion that if anybody meets the description of what the Antichrist is supposed to be, MBS is the perfect candidate. And so we've had that discussion, which I always like indulging those kind of thoughts because, it keeps you honest and it makes you really think hard about the things that you're asserting. But anyway, that's interesting. So I wanted to share this. So going back to Abdu, this is the guy who, was the student of the guy Matt was just talking about, the first student. And then it goes to this guy, Rashid Rida, and then it goes to this guy, Hassan Alban, and then it goes to this guy, Al Qaradawi. We'll get to him in a minute. But Abdu, this is what I was saying before. At the time, he also studied with his disciples, which eventually led to him embracing ideas including revulsion against folk Sufism, criticism of Taqlid. Taqlid, as I understand it, is like the acceptance that the word is the word. What's written in the Quran is the word, and you don't try to reinterpret it. You live up to what is written as it's written. Stop trying to reinterpret it. And so he says the desire to revive Hadith studies. So Hadith studies, what that is we're going to reinterpret. We're going to look at what the original scriptures are, and then we're going to try to reinterpret for the modern, the fluid nature of this stuff. The meanings change over the centuries, and we have to reinterpret it for the modern age. Very familiar to the language used today against the Constitution. But that's also the exact same mindset that was used to write the Talmud and was used to write the Zohar, which created the Kabbalah in the 13th century, was that they were going to go back and read the original ancient Jewish scriptures and reinterpret what they think the people actually meant. And that's how you get to the idea of King Solomon, using magic and summoning demons to help him build his temple. So that same idea is exactly what Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister of Israel, has said needs to happen with even the current iteration of Judaism. They need to reinterpret it all over again and then apply it to government to allow rabbis basically to have the power to continue to interpret law and issue new edicts for how to live your life. That's exactly what was happening in Wahhabi Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. So they create, Salafi Islam. I've done the dig on it a long time ago, but Salafi Islam, just to kind of summarize it, is I think there's four different major sects, if you want to call it that, of Salafi Islam. The one, like the most important one and the biggest one and the most recognizable one being Wahhabi, which as far as I could tell, just digging into it, not being an expert on it, Wahhabi is probably the most legitimate of any of them because it seems to have actually developed organically, where these other ones seem to be just be guys like this guy Abdu and these in his cohorts being funded by the British to kind of come up with these alternative interpretations of Islam, whereas Wahhabism, we've gone down that rabbit hole before, but the early 1700s in the desert, Al-Wahhab and the original Al-Saud forming a partnership.
Yeah.
So if of all of them, what's ironic is of all the versions of Salafi Islam, these are all the radical interpretations of Islam, that lead to Sharia law. Wahhabism seems to be the most organic, I should say, not legitimate, but organic. But it's also the one that Wahhabists themselves say is not a thing. Like the Wahhabists were always very, very stern in saying there's no such thing as Wahhabi. There's just Islam. We're just Muslims. Like, don't call us Wahhabi. We're not a special subset of Islam. We are the original Islam. Y'all are all the fakers. So they didn't even acknowledge the fact that these other guys in Cairo were calling them, Salafi. It's very confusing, but it's also just kind of points to the fact that this is all just the British intelligence wearing a skin suit in order to trick all the other Arabs and Muslims into killing each other. That's really what this is, which we see happen in the evangelical movement in America. We see it happening even in the Jewish movements, in Eastern Europe and eventually in Israel. So this is something that is done over and over and over and over again, where these occultist groups come in and they wear a skin suit to try to trick everyone else into subversive behavior and self-destructive behavior. These three guys all influenced this guy, Yusuf al-Qaradara, and so he is credited as I understand it. He was the chairman. He died in 2022, but he was the chairman of the International Union of Muslim Scholars. He was based in Qatar, and that thing, the Union of Muslim Scholars, I'm just gonna call it the Union because just to reference it. Is considered a terrorist organization by all the Arab nations like Saudi Arabia, Jordan. Egypt. They all consider it a terrorist organization that is directly connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. Mm-hmm. And so, you like just reading through this guy's history, you can see that there's a lot of like glaring moments where you kind of stop and you say, okay, so he's driven out of Egypt. He's forced to leave Egypt, and he goes and he sets up residence in Qatar in 1977, and he doesn't return to Egypt until 2011. That's when he finally returns, and the reason he returns is because the Muslim Brotherhood overthrow the government of Egypt. They try to overthrow every government in the Middle East in the Arab Spring. They succeed in Tunisia and they succeed in Egypt, and everywhere else it fails. So in 2011, he comes back to Egypt finally after decades of being away. He's tied to the Brookings Institute. You've talked about them before. And then on 2011, he also immediately issues a fatwa, which is one of those edicts I just mentioned, the edict where, these clerics have this moment of clarity and they're like, oh, I have a new idea. Everyone should listen to what I say now, right? And so he says his religious ruling was that I'm permitting the killing of Muammar Gaddafi. And then NATO turns around and kills Gaddafi, raids his compound, takes all the weapons, ships it off to Syria, and we get ISIS. So this guy is the one who told all the other Muslims, all the other radicalized Muslims, hey, I have this moment of clarity from God, and we're allowed to kill Gaddafi. Go kill him. And so that's what leads to all these guys surrounding Gaddafi's castle, embargoing it. Gaddafi calls Hillary Clinton, basically begs for his life. Hillary says, look, if you come out and surrender, we will let you live. And of course, we saw what happened. They live streamed butchering him, like cutting his legs off, dragging his corpse around, hanging it from a bridge, lighting it on fire. I mean, all kinds of horrible things. They were doing. And they live stream the whole thing to the internet as a message to all the other leaders of the world. If you stand against us, this is what we're going to do to you. Yeah.
No, that's so important. And I mean, it's really, really important to realize that the 2010 Arab Spring was entirely run as without the Muslim Brotherhood component, it would have all been impossible. You could not have gotten that in Tunisia, in Libya. the whole Arab world was lit on fire in many ways. Mubarak was ousted, later on died. But I mean, what did you have in Egypt? Like you said, it was, the Muslim Brotherhood took control with Morsi, right? Obama had installed the Muslim Brotherhood high-level official into the National Security Council as well. I forgot his name. As sort of the intermediary to have a direct connection with the Muslim Brotherhood, which were the assets that were being put in. At the same time, Morsi was making moves. I was just reading about this the other day to sell the Suez Canal to Qatar, which was, again, a Muslim Brotherhood hub still. There's evidence that there's been a fight back against it, but that's been a thing now for a number of decades. And that was only stopped because you had Morsi, El-Sisi, a general within the Egyptian military, which has sort of always been the dark horse. The Egyptian military has really been something which has saved the nation at different times of crisis. And Morsi was able to be ousted, and El-Sisi came in, canceled the sell off of the Suez Canal, went and expanded the Suez Canal to double the length of it, which still has yet to sort of be like, we're not seeing that fruit being reaped yet, but still you got pushback all over. Now, the thing about the Muslim Brotherhood, I got a picture here as well. We mentioned already al-Banna, Hassan al-Banna, the founder, tied to British Freemasonry, who was a follower of the general worldview of earlier al-Afghani and his disciples that created the framework for this thing. So he founded the Muslim Brotherhood in 28. But what's important is that this thing killed several Egyptian leaders. You had the assassination in 1945 of Egypt's prime minister, who was trying to fight against this thing. And then again, the assassination of the new prime minister in 1948. The Muslim Brotherhood were like an assassination bureau. They were like sort of a rehashing of the Hashashin assassins, in my mind, which were the original sort of terrorists that would be deployed during the Crusades to kill mostly Muslim leaders who were trying to find peace with the Christian crusaders at different times who were and what's been discovered and documented I've been reading this now for the last few months. The Templars, the Hospitallers, but especially the Templars and the Assassins, which were these, again, Nizari, Ismaili, pseudo-Shia Gnostics. It was a secret drug cult. Basically, they would work together to keep the fires of forever conflict going, to justify both of their existences in both cases. And there's a whole story behind that. But all that to say, when you look at...
You basically just described the CIA's MO. It's like... that is the CIA. That's exactly what their entire mission statement is. Like, totally. Justify our own existence. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, you gotta just keep the crisis going to have management by crisis and do whatever, work with Nazis, you name it. Now, al-Banna, he was counter assassinated by nationalist forces in Egypt in 49. There was a big attack. So when you had this guy here, really important guy, Gamal Nasser, who was he was another military figure, much like El-Sisi, except probably better and even cooler. But he was able to.
Yeah, I would say he's more. Yeah, I would say he's better and more important than Sisi for sure,
by far. But just to demonstrate, like, he was a young military officer, and basically he saw his country going to hell, and he led a conspiracy to take back control. He ousted the British puppet and Farouk, who was also an Egyptian Freemason, an Egyptian Freemason under a United Grand Lodge outlet, as was al-Banna, and then banned the Muslim Brotherhood. They tried several assassination attempts on him. He survived. He made the point that the revolution will never allow reactionary corruption to recur in the name of religion. So he shut down the Muslim Brotherhood, but they regrouped. They had already... And the thing that he shut down after al-Banna had been killed was a revived Muslim Brotherhood that was sort of reconfigured in 1951 by the British before he took control under this guy, Sayyid Qutb al-Shahid, who admitted that he was a British Freemason. He admitted that. He had already, and there's actually documentation that has come to surface that that's the case. So these guys are practicing different, like what's known as like a syncretization of Manichaeism, a certain mystical Zoroastrianism, Kabbalism, and there's actually a variation of it in the Muslim world of it's not called the Kabbalah, it's called Batinia, which is sort of like a Kabbalism for Muslims, which has like an esoteric outward teaching and an exoteric outward and esoteric inward teaching, and the open one is called the exoteric open teaching for the plebes who are uninitiated is called the Zahir, and the hidden teaching is the Batini. So this thing was created during the Crusades by a guy who created the philosophical foundation for the assassins, the Hashashins, because they smoked hash to get into an altered state when they would go out
and kill
and carry out their terrorist campaigns, basically. And the idea was that if they died carrying out one of their targeted murders, they would be reborn in paradise. Now, what's interesting about this is that here, actually, I got a little thing here. This is the guy, Hassan Isaba, who's known as the Old Man of the Mountain. He controlled in Iran a certain castle, which the name I'm forgetting, and he created this valley that was surrounded by mountains, and inside the valley, and this is documented by Marco Polo, who actually wrote about his experience with these assassins and the old men of the mountain, who are the grand masters of the assassin order. It was, again, very, very similar to the Templars as far as the organizational structure, the coat of arms, the color coding of red and white, which they used for their military orders. But they had all of these castles all over, and the Alamut, that's the Alamut Castle. And in this valley near the Alamut Castle, which was impenetrable, they created this beautiful valley. They brought in all of these prostitutes that they provided drugs and food. They treated them like in the lap of luxury, but all they had to do was have rampant sex with young initiated men that they would drug. So if you'd be tapped like let's say Skull and Bones, right? You'd receive the tap, and you'd be really happy if you qualified to get the tap, and you'd be tested. If you passed those tests, you would find yourself at some point exposed to a drug that would put you into a catatonic state. When you woke up, you were all of a sudden in this weird valley. You didn't know. It was like heaven, and you were just fed for a couple of weeks, maybe months, I don't know, of just sex galore. Whatever hedonistic thing you wanted, you got. And then at a certain point, you were drugged again, and all of a sudden you woke up in the desert in a cell of people who were gonna either handle you, and in some cases maybe young men had also been through a similar experience. They all woke up together. There were some people who were a little bit more trained, as again CIA handlers might be managing a cell, that would then be told, this is your assignment, and when you die having accomplished your assignment, you will then be reborn again in paradise with all of those 72 virgins
in the valley. Dude, that's amazing. That's the best explanation I've ever heard of like the whole 72 virgin thing. That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, you talk about handlers, so it's pretty widely understood. I mean, so Huma Abedin, her whole family is involved in the Muslim Brotherhood. That's been pretty firmly established. A lot of speculation that she was Hillary Clinton's handler, and that, like, Muslim Brotherhood MI6 handler, or at least some sort of an agent asset who was observing Hillary Clinton and reporting back. Interesting to point out that this is where she is now. Now that Hillary Clinton is basically politically irrelevant, she is now engaged to Alex Soros.
It's too much.
And you have to remember, who was she married to before? Anthony Weiner, right? And Weiner was kind of the heir apparent in the New York Democratic scene. Like, he was going to become the mayor of New York, the governor of New York, maybe the president one day, until all the scandal around him erupted. And she was
wasn't he like showing off his schlong? And
he was sending he was sending dick pics basically to like 15-year-old girls. That's what it was. Yeah. So I mean, this woman has gone from the guy who was, poised to at least become the governor of New York, to the son of George Soros. And in the interim, I mean, throughout that whole time, she was working as the personal assistant to Hillary Clinton. So I think the allegations that she is some sort of a handler are pretty strong. That she probably was the handler for all three of those people: Weiner, Clinton, Soros. And she would have been the person who awakened them in the desert and said, "Hey, here's your mission. If you succeed, you will awaken back in the valley again." Right?
Yeah.
She would have been the one who would have told them that.
That's hilarious.
And then like monitored them to make sure their mission was a success. That's basically how all this stuff works, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you go like to kind of bring it all full circle, because I think we probably need to wrap up here. We have this. This is from back in September. I think this is I feel like this is from a lot longer ago than just September 1st, but my ability to perceive time is just completely shot at this point, because the days are very long, but the weeks are flying by.
Yeah.
Although I feel like the days fly by too. But Netanyahu saying accusing me of war crimes is like in Gaza is like accusing George Bush of 9/11. An amazing thing for Netanyahu to say, given what I said earlier at the beginning of the show, that I think Netanyahu was a key player in 9/11. He said in 2008 that 9/11 was a very good thing, that had like one of the best things that ever happened. He said that.
Yeah.
It's not like conspiracy. He said that and people were, and even the MSM was like, "What the hell is Netanyahu talking about?" But
Absolutely. No, I definitely see that. And I just love that. He's pretty much just admitted to war crimes in the Gaza. This is like the best admission I've ever seen. He just did it.
It's so Freudian. It's like the best Freudian slip of all time.
Yeah, that's the most honest I've ever seen. BB. Well, that's great, man. No, I think look, this is such a Russian doll, and it's such a can of worms, but I think we were able to shed light on the essential characteristics of this Muslim Brotherhood operation as a foreign intelligence Freemasonic agency spawned into corrupting the and destroying the Muslim world from within. In the same way that we have similar Freemasonic agencies, Kabbalistic outfits that have been infused into destroying the Jewish world from within, and the same thing for Christians, and the same thing with esoteric Buddhism, which Henry Steele Olcott, the second in command with Blavatsky, created and really groomed in Sri Lanka. That's grown into a whole sect within the Buddhist world. Well, variations as well, which for centuries were known as Thugis when they were seeded into India by a weird mystery Muslim grouping that had infused itself into India right around the same time that the Hashashins were taken down by the Mongols. So the Hashashins were destroyed in the Middle East. They then kind of went to Azerbaijan. They went underground. So there are remnants in the Middle East that still continued on through many people who followed in the footsteps of, or not in the footsteps, but continued the legacy, but on the down low. But then other groupings were founded in India. And if you look at it, when the British got into India, they quickly identified, as well as when they got into Iran and Afghanistan, they identified these networks. And one of the biggest sort of today institutions, which people should hold in mind, is the Aga Khan. The Aga Khan is the 45th, or the first Aga Khan. Today, there's been 4 since 1811. But this is the 45th or 46th caliph of the Nizari Ismailis, which are the Hashashins, which profess an outward teaching and an inner teaching that, for those who have been inside of Aga Khan's system, of the Ismailis, of this sect within Ismailis, they have come out saying that, kind of like the Scientologists who've been brought into the OT 7, 8, 9 who have left, they all say the same sort of thing, is that this is satanic. and that the Aga Khan passes himself off as literally Allah as well as Vishnu and every god, Yahweh as well as Satan. Like he's every god, all in one incarnation as an avatar. Hitler believed something similar, that he was sort of Wotan incarnated as the avatar. A lot of this is part of this is what the Theosophists and their different spin-off groups all promoted as well, that there's these demonic entities that fuse themselves into individuals. This is how they interpret the Mahdi. This is how some of them interpret what they believe the Messiah should be, is this fusion of profanity and sacredness, right? Of good and evil fused together unnaturally in some hermetic alchemical sort of unification. That's part of their cosmology. It's part of the Rosicrucian order as well, which spawned itself out of the Templars, because around the same time that the Hashashins were being taken down, the Templars, who, by the way, just to remind people, and I know we're going to close this up, but we're worshiping this guy, androgynous male, female, goat-headed god Baphomet, with its, snakes and coiled around its phallic libido, as a unification of a variety of animals that were big in the pagan pre-Christian world, with a goat's head and pentagon, pointing to the sun and to the moon, or a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse, indicating the Apollo Dionysian mechanism of being dutiful, withholding during the day, being Apollonian during the day. That's the solar deity, or otherwise known as Roman Helios, or Lucifer is the Christianized version of the same deity, during the daytime. And then at night, you unleash the beast. You go Dionysian or Bacchanalian, and you have your animalistic sex orgies where you just let your beast out, and then you unshackle it, and you do your Apollonian thing during the day again. And that's the way that they've controlled their global cult systems in different cultures of the world. But that's again what the Templars were found to be worshiping, was this androgynous male-female god Baphomet, which is just, very much tied to what they thought they were doing or worship under Solomon's temple. And I'm going to say this again, because this has big impacts for what's happening now 1,000 years later, with the stuff going on, where I think it's like next year in April or something is the scheduled sacrifice of the 4 red heifers as part of the inauguration of the reconstruction of Solomon's temple, as some invocation of end times. That's exactly what the Templars were doing as they were being trained by an order of Sufi mystics and Hashashins. The Sufi priests of the pre-Christian world were training them, teaching them what the cross actually means. They're like, oh, that's what the famous saying from these Sufi priests working with the Templars, excavating Mount Moria, which is where Solomon's mines are, saying, oh, you have the cross, but we have the meaning of the cross, and it's not what you think it is. And so they've got this whole this idea of reviving the ancient pre-monotheistic orders, where human mass sacrifice was the norm. That's how you worshipped God, and you got the gods to do good things for you. If you wanted a booster harvest or something, you had to kill your firstborn kids. Oftentimes, the bigger the sacrifice, the more pure the sacrifice, the bigger the benefits from the gods. That was practiced all across the Nordic pagan, Odin worshipping, Viking worlds too, that were brought in with the Northmen invaders that took over England, that were brought in to take over Spain, that created the basis for the Crusades. You got to really accept that child sacrifice, mass sacrifice, it's not just the Aztecs. This is a common theme, along with drugs. A lot of psychedelic, hallucinogenic drugs, mushrooms, opiates, other things were used.
Druids, right? Like the Druids.
Yeah, like a lot of mass sacrifice of the Druids.
All that stuff, yeah.
All that shit, necromancy. It's evil shit here. And this is the stuff that's behind the scenes, pushing to get all of the Jews to kill all of the Jews, and all the Muslims to kill all the Jews and the Muslims, just to get everybody to kill everybody in some weird invocation of whatever Christianity era.
Whatever division they can find. Get men to kill women, get women to kill men.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's like whatever point of division it is, they get in there and they exploit it. Religion is just the best and easiest, because what religion does is it has a way.
They got the emperor hostage. They were able to like sell him back as ransom. But then the new emperor because they basically punished this emperor after they bought him back from the Seljuks. They gouged out his eyes, stuffed him into some monastery. And the new emperor was like super insecure of this because the Seljuks didn't really want to. There's no evidence I've seen that they actually wanted to take over the Byzantine territories. They just wanted to secure their borders. But then this new emperor wrote messages to the Vatican, to I think it's Pope, I think it's Innocent II, saying, please, please, please help us fight because they're going to take over Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, and then they're going to take over the Western front as well. And so he started writing these letters, which by 1095 resulted in Innocent II saying, okay, we'll preemptively stop the takeover of Europe from the Seljuk Turks by launching the crusade to take back the Holy Land now. And so that's what was sort of one of the driving impetuses, was this preventative war by the this weird collusion after the schism had already happened between the East and Western Church. After it, there was still collusion that involved then ushering in this preventative war of the First Crusade that then just created a new dynamic of forever wars and revanchism for the next several centuries. So again, it's not just Friedrich. It goes back even further as far as project our own imperial proclivities onto our so-called rival, that we assume that the rival wants to do what we want to do because we're degenerate. We assume everybody is, and then use that excuse to then declare war against people who otherwise would not have actually wanted war against us. So yeah, it's goes back a long way.
Well said. Well said. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for us for today. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hit the thumbs up before you leave. Sorry if you've been having issues watching us live. It seems like Rumble's having some issues right now, but if you come back and watch us on replay, it should be smooth. So,
yeah. And if you're in Florida, stay safe.
Yes.
Crazy stuff going on.
Be smart. Just be smart. Don't take unnecessary risks. Do what works best for you, but be smart and don't underplay. Like, don't listen to people who are underplaying the severity of it. I think it is a pretty serious storm developing. So,
yeah, absolutely. All right. Till next week, everyone. Thanks, Gordon.
Yeah. See you, Matt.